Sometimes the heart wants what it cannot have, and sometimes it gets exactly that, with consequences that ripple through eternity. In the sterile fluorescent halls of the Crimson Cross Blood Clinic in Seattle, Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her stethoscope against her still flat belly and heard the impossible, a heartbeat that shouldn't exist. 6 months had passed since she'd fled Prague in the dead of night, leaving behind silk sheets stained with more than passion, and a lover whose kiss could stop her heart, literally. The November rain drummed against the clinic windows as she stared at the ultrasound image that defied every medical textbook she'd ever memorized. Elena had spent her career studying blood, its diseases, its mysteries, its life-giving properties. But nothing had prepared her for this. A child growing inside her from a man who had no pulse, no breath, no mortality. The pregnancy test had been positive for 3 weeks now, and each day brought new impossibilities. The baby's blood, when she dared to test a single drop, glowed with an ethereal luminescence that made her hands tremble. She'd thought distance would protect her from Cassius Blackthorn's ancient hunger and possessive obsession. She'd been wrong. The shadows in her lab seemed to whisper his name, and she could feel his presence drawing closer like a storm building on the horizon. What happens when the dead create life, and what kind of future waits for a child born from eternity itself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drop of blood on the microscope slide pulsed with its own inner light, a soft crimson glow that seemed to breathe in rhythm with something Elena couldn't quite comprehend. She adjusted the focus, her hands steadier than her racing heart, and watched as the cellular structure revealed itself. Familiar yet alien, human yet something else entirely. "Dr. Vasquez?" The voice of her research assistant, Marcus, drifted through the intercom. "The evening blood drive results are ready for your review." Elena quickly switched slides, her movements practiced and swift. "Send them to my terminal. I'll review them in an hour." She couldn't let anyone else see this. Not yet. Not until she understood what was happening inside her body. The Crimson Cross Clinic had become her sanctuary after Prague, a place where she could lose herself in the familiar rhythms of medical research and blood analysis. The irony wasn't lost on her, fleeing a vampire only to surround herself with the very substance that had sustained him for centuries. But here, blood was clinical, safe. It flowed through 4 tubes and filled collection bags with mechanical precision, nothing like the way Cassius had traced her pulse points with reverent fingers, his eyes darkening with an hunger that went beyond the physical. Elena pushed the memory away and focused on the data streaming across her computer screen. Hemoglobin levels, white cell counts, platelet distributions, numbers that made sense in a world that increasingly didn't. She'd built her reputation on understanding the mysteries hidden in blood, publishing papers on rare genetic disorders and breakthrough treatments that had earned her international recognition. That expertise had led her to Prague in the first place, consulting on a mysterious blood disorder that affected only the city's oldest families. She'd never imagined those families weren't entirely human. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague Dr. Sarah Chen. "Wine tonight? You've been working too late again." Elena stared at the message. Wine. Another impossibility to add to her growing list. Even before the pregnancy, alcohol had begun to taste like ash in her mouth, her body rejecting it with an intensity that left her nauseated. Just one more way, her physiology had started changing after those months with Cassius, his bite marks healing too quickly, her own blood seeming to flow with new purpose. She typed back, rain check. Trying to crack this new research project. Outside her office window, Seattle's perpetual November drizzle painted abstract patterns on the glass. The city's grey atmosphere had drawn her here, so different from Prague's ancient beauty and hidden shadows. Here, she told herself, she could disappear into the anonymity of another talented doctor in a city full of them. She'd changed her name slightly, Dr. Elena Vasquez instead of Dr. Elena Rodriguez Vasquez, found a small apartment in Capitol Hill where the constant hum of life made her feel less alone. But solitude was an illusion when you carried someone else's child. Elena returned to her private slide, switching off the overhead fluorescence so only the microscope's light illuminated her workspace. In the darkness, her blood sample glowed brighter, like starlight captured in liquid form. She'd tested it a dozen times now, always with the same impossible result. The cellular structure showed signs of accelerated healing, enhanced oxygen capacity, and something her instruments couldn't quite identify, an energy signature that registered on her equipment as electromagnetic fluctuation. The baby was changing her, even as she carried it. She placed a hand over her abdomen, still flat but somehow different, warmer, as if something inside generated its own heat. The heartbeat she'd detected earlier had been strong, far stronger than should be possible at such an early stage, and fast. Too fast for a normal human fetus, but with a rhythm that seemed almost ancient. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the dark window, and for a moment she could swear her eyes held flecks of gold that hadn't been there 6 months ago. In Prague, she'd attributed such changes to the city's unusual lighting, the way candlelight and shadows played tricks on perception. But this was different. This was Seattle's harsh fluorescent reality, and she was still changing. Her computer chimed with an incoming email, routine blood drive analysis from the day's donors. Elena began reviewing the data, her trained eye catching anomalies and patterns that would escape most physicians. It was methodical work, soothing in its predictability, until she reached donor number 247. The blood signature made her breath catch. The cellular structure was ancient, powerful, with markers she'd only seen once before, in samples she'd analyzed in Prague before learning what they truly represented. This wasn't from any ordinary donor. Someone else was in Seattle now, someone whose blood sang with the same immortal resonance that had drawn her into Cassius's world. Elena's hands trembled as she cross-referenced the donor information. Anonymous donation, cash payment, no contact information. But the timestamp showed it had been collected less than 2 hours ago. She pressed her palm against her belly again, feeling that impossible warmth pulse stronger, as if, responding to proximity, they'd found her. Elena's first instinct was to run. It had served her well in Prague, when she'd slipped away from Cassius's penthouse in the pre-dawn hours, her shoes silent on rain, slicked cobblestones as she made her way to the airport with nothing but a hastily packed bag and 6 months of careful planning. But running now meant abandoning the life she'd built here, the careful routines that had become her armor against the chaos of what she'd discovered about herself. She forced herself to take inventory of what she stood to lose. The position at Crimson Cross had been a coup, heading her own research division at 32, with funding for cutting-edge hematological studies that could change the field forever. Her apartment in Capitol Hill, small but hers, with its view of the Space Needle and the comforting sounds of ordinary human life drifting up from the street below. The colleagues who'd begun to feel like friends, especially Sarah, who brought her soup when she worked late and never asked about the mysterious past that had brought Elena to Seattle. Most importantly, this was where she'd planned to raise her child, impossibility or not. She'd already begun researching the best pediatricians, had bookmarked articles about pregnancy nutrition despite her body's increasingly unusual dietary preferences. The normalcy she'd cultivated here felt like a shield against whatever darkness might be growing inside her. Elena minimized the donor files and pulled up her calendar instead. Tomorrow's schedule looked reassuringly mundane. Staff meeting at 8, 3 patient consultations for rare blood disorders, a conference call with the research team analyzing their latest anemia treatment trials. Dr. Martinez had invited her to lunch to discuss the quarterly budget, and she'd promised to review resumes for the new lab technician position they were hiring. It was the kind of ordinary professional life she'd never thought she wanted. Before Prague, she'd thrived on challenges that pushed the boundaries of medical knowledge, consulting cases that took her to the edges of scientific understanding. The more mysterious the blood disorder, the more determined she became to solve it. That ambition had made her internationally recognized in her field, and it had led her straight into Cassius's web. Now she found herself craving the mundane. Patient consultations where the diagnosis was straightforward, research projects with predictable timelines, lunch meetings about budgets instead of life-altering discoveries. She'd even started bringing homemade sandwiches to work, a domesticity that would have made her old self cringe, but now felt like an anchor to humanity. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "I know you said rain check." Sarah's voice carried its usual warmth. "But I'm in the lobby with Chinese takeout. You need to eat actual food, not whatever energy bars you've been surviving on." Elena glanced at her reflection in the dark window again, noting the shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Sarah, Nope, no arguments. I'm coming up." The line went dead, and Elena found herself smiling despite everything. This was what she'd miss most if she had to run again, the casual intimacy of friendship, people who cared about her well-being without expecting anything in return. In Cassius's world, every gesture had carried weight, every kindness had come with invisible strings attached. Even his gentleness had felt like possession, beautiful and terrible in its intensity. She quickly secured her private blood samples in the locked refrigeration unit, using the code that only she knew. The donor files remained open on her screen. She'd need to study them more carefully, try to trace whether this mysterious donor might return. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone wanted her to know they were here. Elena's hand drifted to her abdomen again, a gesture that was becoming unconscious. The warmth there seemed to pulse in response to her anxiety, as if the child could sense her emotional state. Another impossibility to add to the growing list. Normal pregnancies didn't work this way. The neural connections that might allow such awareness wouldn't develop for months yet. But nothing about this pregnancy followed normal rules. The elevator dinged in the hallway outside her office, followed by Sarah's familiar footsteps. Elena took a steadying breath and switched to reviewing routine lab reports, schooling her expression into the calm professionalism that had become second nature. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," Sarah announced, sweeping through the door with bags of fragrant food. "When was the last time you went home before midnight?" "I lose track of time when I'm working," Elena said, and it was true. The research had become a refuge where hours passed without her having to think about impossible pregnancies or ancient blood signatures or the way Cassius had looked at her the last time she'd seen him, hungry and desperate and somehow heartbroken. Sarah began unpacking containers of pad thai and spring rolls, the normalcy of the gesture almost overwhelmingly precious. This was her ordinary world now, and Elena realized with sudden fierce clarity that she wasn't ready to give it up. Not yet. Whatever was coming for her would have to face her here, surrounded by the life she'd chosen to build. The scent of pad thai filled her office, rich with basil and lime, but Elena's enhanced senses caught something else underneath, something that made her stomach clench with recognition. Sarah was settling into the chair across from her desk, chattering about the new intern's tendency to mislabel blood samples, when Elena's phone began to vibrate against the metal surface. Not a call. A message. Elena glanced at the screen and felt the world tilt sideways. Unknown number, but the words made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. "The child's heartbeat is beautiful. We should discuss its future. Elena?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from underwater. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elena forced herself to set the phone face down, but her hands were shaking. "Just tired. Long day." But Sarah had always been perceptive. Her dark eyes narrowed with concern as she studied Elena's face. "When you say tired, do you mean exhausted from overwork tired, or something is seriously wrong tired? Because you've been different lately." The warmth in Elena's abdomen pulsed stronger, as if responding to her spike of panic. She pressed her palm against her lab coat, trying to still the sensation. "Different how?" "More careful, like you're constantly listening for something." Sarah leaned forward, abandoning her chopsticks. "Plus, there's the way you've been avoiding wine, skipping lunch meetings, and I swear you jump every time the elevator dings unexpectedly." Elena's phone buzzed again. This time she couldn't stop herself from looking. "Don't make me come to you. You know how I dislike public scenes." The laboratory suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing inward despite the modern architecture designed for openness and light. Elena's enhanced hearing picked up sounds she'd learned to filter out, the hum of centrifuges 3 floors below, conversations in the parking garage, the distinctive whisper of expensive fabric against marble as someone moved through the lobby with inhuman grace. He was here, in the building. "I have to go," Elena said, standing so abruptly that her chair rolled backward into the wall. "Go where?" "Elena, it's almost 9 o'clock at night, and you haven't eaten." The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied, but Elena caught the scent of ozone in the air, the electric charge that always preceded Cassius's arrival. Her body remembered it, even as her mind tried to reject the possibility. 6 months of careful distance, of building new routines and cultivating normalcy, and he could still affect her environment just by being near. "Sarah, you need to leave, right now." Elena moved to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard as she initiated the security protocols for her private research files. "Take the stairs, not the elevator." "What are you talking about?" "Elena, you're scaring me." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Elena's breath began to mist as she grabbed her jacket and the emergency bag she'd kept packed beneath her desk. Old habits from Prague that she'd never been able to shake. Inside, cash, fake ID documents, a USB drive with copies of her most critical research. "There's someone here I need to see alone," Elena said, hating the way her voice cracked on the words. "Someone from my past who—" "Sarah, please, trust me on this." Sarah stood slowly, her expression shifting from concern to fear as she registered Elena's panic. "Should I call security?" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Security guards couldn't protect anyone from what was coming. "Just go home, lock your doors, don't come back until tomorrow afternoon." The elevator dinged in the hallway, the sound Elena had been dreading. Sarah grabbed her purse with suddenly clumsy fingers, the normalcy of their evening dissolving like sugar in rain. "Elena, whatever this is, I'll handle it." Elena forced herself to meet her friend's eyes, hoping Sarah couldn't see the terror she was trying to hide. "I promise I'll explain everything tomorrow." It was a lie, and they both knew it. If Cassius had found her, if he knew about the pregnancy, tomorrow might not exist as she knew it. The life she'd built here could end tonight, reduced to nothing more than another identity she'd have to abandon. Sarah hesitated at the door, clearly torn between self-preservation and loyalty. "Call me if you need anything, anything at all." Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing in the hallway as she hurried toward the emergency stairs. Elena listened to the sound fade, then turned back to her computer to delete the last traces of her private research. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as her enhanced senses tracked the approach of something that shouldn't exist. The child inside her pulsed warmer, responding to proximity with an awareness that defied medical explanation, as if it recognized its father's presence. Elena faced her reflection in the dark window one last time, seeing the gold flecks in her eyes burn brighter in anticipation. The ordinary world she'd fought to build was about to shatter, and she had to choose, run again, or finally face the impossible future growing inside her. The elevator opened down the hall with a whisper of displaced air. Elena froze at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, as footsteps approached down the hallway. Measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of centuries. She could run. The emergency stairs Sarah had taken were only 50 feet from her office door. Her car waited in the parking garage, and she'd memorized 3 different escape routes out of Seattle during her first week here. But running meant abandoning everything again. The research position she'd worked years to achieve. The tiny apartment where she'd finally learned to sleep without checking the locks twice. The careful friendships she'd begun to cultivate, built on the foundation of being Dr. Elena Vasquez. Competent, reliable, ordinary. Running meant becoming no one again, starting over in another city with another name, always looking over her shoulder. The child inside her pulsed with that impossible warmth, and Elena's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen. If she ran now, she'd be running forever. Whatever was growing inside her wouldn't stay hidden much longer. The changes in her blood, her enhanced senses, the way her body temperature had begun to fluctuate, these weren't things she could hide indefinitely. And if Cassius had found her this easily, others would follow. But staying means confronting what you've been hiding from for 6 months. The thought made her stomach clench with more than morning sickness. She'd fled Prague because she couldn't reconcile the brilliant, passionate man she'd fallen in love with and the ancient predator who'd begun to see her as a fascinating specimen to be studied and possessed. Cassius had never hurt her, quite the opposite, but his intensity had become suffocating, the way he'd traced her pulse points with reverent fingers as if mapping territory he intended to claim. The casual mentions of forever that had sounded less like promises than certainties. She'd realized, sitting in his penthouse overlooking the Vltava River while he fed her strawberries and spoke of showing her the world's hidden wonders, that he'd never considered the possibility she might say no to eternity. That choice wasn't part of his vocabulary when it came to things he desired. Elena's phone buzzed again. I can hear the child's heartbeat from here. Extraordinary. Her blood turned to ice. If he could sense the baby from down the hall, then her pregnancy was further along than she'd calculated, or the child was developing abilities that shouldn't be possible. She thought of the glowing blood samples locked in her refrigeration unit, the cellular structures that defied medical explanation, the way her body had begun craving rare steaks instead of her usual vegetarian diet. What if the child is more his than mine? The question she'd been avoiding crystallized with terrifying clarity. Vampires couldn't create life. It violated everything she understood about their physiology. But what if this child wasn't bound by those rules? What if it carried abilities that made it valuable to others beyond just its impossibility? Elena thought of the anonymous blood donor whose sample had appeared in today's batch. Someone else was already here, watching. If she ran, she'd be protecting the baby from Cassius, but potentially delivering it to whoever else was hunting them. If she stayed, she'd have to trust the man who'd never learned to see her as anything more than a beautiful acquisition. The footsteps had stopped outside her office door. She could picture him standing there, tall and elegant in one of his perfectly tailored suits, dark hair slightly disheveled from travel, those ancient amber eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. He'd be holding himself with that supernatural stillness that had once fascinated her and now made her skin crawl. Waiting with the infinite patience of someone who'd learned that time bent to his will, not the other way around. He found me in 6 months. How long before others do? Elena's research into her own condition had revealed disturbing possibilities. If vampire-human reproduction was possible, it would overturn everything the supernatural world thought it knew about their own limitations. The child would be studied, coveted, potentially hunted by those who saw it as either salvation or abomination. And she was just one human woman, with enhanced blood chemistry and a basic understanding of supernatural politics gleaned from 3 months of pillow talk with a man who'd never told her the whole truth about his world. The warmth in her abdomen pulsed stronger, and for the first time, Elena felt something that might have been communication, not words, but a sense of reassurance. As if the child could sense her fear and was trying to comfort her. The impossibility of it should have terrified her more. Instead, she found herself pressing her palm firmer against her lab coat, anchoring herself to this one impossible constant. Whatever this child is, it's mine. I won't let anyone take that choice away. The door handle turned with a whisper of sound, and Elena lifted her chin as the ordinary world she'd fought to build prepared to shatter. But this time, she wouldn't run. This time, she'd fight for the right to define her own future, even if she had to face the darkness she'd been hiding from to do it. Cassius entered her office like shadow made flesh, his presence transforming the sterile laboratory space into something older and more dangerous. Elena's enhanced senses catalogued every detail despite her racing heart, the way he moved without disturbing the air, the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the metallic scent of old blood, the amber eyes that found her face and held it with possessive intensity. "Hello, Elena." His voice carried the same cultured accent she remembered, tinged with an emotion she couldn't identify. Not anger, though she'd expected that. Something deeper, more complex. Relief mixed with hunger, mixed with something that might have been grief. Cassius. She kept her hand pressed against her abdomen, feeling the child's warmth pulse in response to his proximity. You look well. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. 6 months of searching tends to disagree with one's constitution. You've become remarkably skilled at disappearing. I had excellent motivation. Elena forced herself to remain seated, projecting a calm she didn't feel. Running now would only trigger his predatory instincts, though apparently not skilled enough. The blood clinic was inspired. Hide among the thing you understand best. Cassius moved closer, his movements fluid as water. I might never have found you if not for the change in your circumstances. Elena's throat constricted. You can sense it. I can sense many things about you now that I couldn't before. His eyes dropped to where her hand rested against her lab coat. The child's heartbeat is unlike anything I've encountered in 4 centuries of existence. Strong, yes, but there's something else. A resonance that shouldn't be possible. Because vampires can't create life. No, he said quietly, we cannot. Which makes our situation rather unprecedented. Our situation. The possessive pronoun sent ice through Elena's veins, even as the child inside her pulsed with what felt disturbingly like recognition. There is no our situation, Cassius. There's my pregnancy, my choice, and my life that I'm trying to build without you in it. Cassius tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Do you truly believe you can raise this child alone? That you can protect something this extraordinary from those who would exploit it? You mean people like you? The words hit their mark. Something flickered across his expression. Pain, perhaps, or acknowledgement of a truth he'd been avoiding. I never exploited you, Elena. I treasured you. You possessed me. Elena stood slowly, her legs steadier than she'd expected. There's a difference, though I don't think you understand it. What I understand, Cassius said, moving closer until she could feel the unnatural coolness radiating from his skin, is that you're carrying something that defies the natural order, something that will draw attention from beings far less considerate than myself. Elena's enhanced hearing caught the subtle threat beneath his polite words. Meaning? Meaning the blood sample that appeared in your clinic today wasn't coincidence. Others know what you are now, Elena. Others who won't hesitate to take what they want. Her blood turned to ice water. How do you know about the sample? Because I've been tracking the same signature for weeks. Someone has been leaving breadcrumbs for you to find, testing whether you've developed the enhanced senses necessary to detect supernatural blood markers. Cassius's expression darkened. They've been hunting you systematically, and now they know you've awakened to your new abilities. Elena thought of the anonymous donor file, the familiar resonance that had made her skin crawl. Someone had wanted her to notice, had been testing her. What new abilities? Instead of answering, Cassius reached toward her face. Elena jerked backward, but he caught her chin gently, tilting it toward the fluorescent lights. Look at yourself, love. Really look. Elena caught her reflection in the dark window behind him and gasped. The gold flecks in her eyes were no longer subtle. They blazed like amber fire, clearly visible even in the harsh laboratory lighting. Her skin held a luminous quality she'd attributed to pregnancy hormones, but now she could see it was something else entirely. The child is changing you, Cassius murmured, making you into something between human and other, something new. Elena pulled away from his touch, her mind reeling. That's impossible. No more impossible than pregnancy itself. His voice carried centuries of knowledge and terrible certainty. You cannot face this alone, Elena. Whatever our personal complications, you need someone who understands the supernatural world. Someone who can protect both you and the child from those who see it as either weapon or abomination. Elena stared at him, seeing the truth she'd been desperately avoiding. Her ordinary life was already over. The moment she'd discovered the pregnancy, the moment she'd begun changing, she'd crossed a threshold there was no returning from. The question wasn't whether to accept his help. It was whether she'd trusted him enough to enter his world willingly, or whether she'd be dragged into it as a victim. The child pulsed warmer, and Elena made her choice. "What do you want from me?" Cassius smiled, and she remembered why she'd fallen in love with him, and why she'd fled. Everything. Elena's blood chilled at the familiar hunger in his voice, but before she could respond, the building's security alarm pierced the air with its electronic shriek. Emergency lighting bathed the laboratory in pulsing red as Cassius's expression shifted from possessive desire to lethal focus in an instant. "They're here," he said, moving to the window with inhuman speed. "Sooner than I anticipated." "Who's here?" Elena grabbed her emergency bag, her enhanced senses picking up sounds that shouldn't have been audible from the 15th floor. The splintering of the lobby's reinforced glass, inhuman snarls echoing through the stairwells, the wet sound of violence spreading through the building like infection. Hunters. The old families who see your child as either salvation or apocalypse. Cassius's hands clenched into fists. "Elena, I need you to listen very carefully. Everything I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but your survival depends on accepting it." The elevator shaft filled with an unnatural howling that made Elena's teeth ache. She pressed both hands against her abdomen as the child inside her pulsed with distress, its warmth flickering like a candle in wind. "Tell me, there are 3 types of beings hunting you now. The Covenant believes your child represents evolution, a bridge between human and vampire that could grant them daywalking abilities. They'll try to keep you alive until birth, then harvest the baby's blood for their experiments." Cassius moved away from the window, his voice clinically detached despite the chaos below. The purifiers see the pregnancy as abomination that threatens the natural order. They'll kill you both without hesitation. And the 3rd? The Court of Shadows wants to study how this happened so they can replicate it. They'll keep you as a breeding specimen. His amber eyes met hers. "All 3 factions are in this building right now." Elena's legs nearly gave out. "How many people are we talking about?" Enough that conventional security won't slow them down. As if summoned by his words, gunfire erupted somewhere below them, followed by screams that cut off too abruptly. "But there's something else, Elena. Something that might save us both." Before she could ask what, the office door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and metal. Elena spun toward the destruction, expecting to see monsters, and instead found herself facing a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a gothic nightmare. Pale skin, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing tactical gear that seemed designed more for ceremony than combat. "Dr. Vasquez." The woman's voice carried a slight accent Elena couldn't place. "My name is Lydia Thorne. I represent parties interested in your unique condition." Cassius positioned himself between Elena and the intruder, his civilized mask dropping to reveal something far more dangerous. "Covenant, Lord Blackthorne." Lydia inclined her head mockingly. "Still playing house with mortals, I see. How disappointingly predictable." "Elena, move toward the emergency exit," Cassius said without taking his eyes off Lydia. Slowly. But Elena found herself frozen, not by fear, but by recognition. The woman's scent carried the same metallic resonance as the anonymous blood sample, old, powerful, and wrong in ways that made the child inside her recoil. "You're the donor. You've been testing me." Lydia smiled, revealing teeth just slightly too sharp. "Clever girl." "I needed to confirm that the pregnancy was developing your latent abilities properly. You've exceeded our expectations." "What? Latent abilities?" Elena demanded, even as she felt something stirring in her blood, an awareness that seemed to extend beyond her skin, mapping the positions of everyone in the room like a supernatural radar. "You're becoming something new, Dr. Vasquez, the first of your kind." Lydia's eyes gleamed with scientific fascination, The child's vampire heritage is awakening dormant genetics in your bloodline, traits that have been sleeping in certain human families for generations, waiting for the right catalyst. Elena's enhanced senses suddenly exploded outward, and she gasped as information flooded her consciousness. She could feel the heartbeats of everyone in the building, could distinguish between human and non-human life signatures, could sense the complex network of supernatural energies moving through the structure like a living map. Extraordinary, Lydia breathed. The awakening is accelerating. Soon you'll be able to... Her words cut off as Cassius moved, crossing the space between them faster than thought. But Lydia was ready, producing a silver blade that gleamed with more than reflected light. They collided in a blur of violence that sent Elena's new awareness reeling. "Elena!" a new voice called from the hallway, and she turned to see Sarah running toward the office, her face streaked with tears and terror. "The building's under attack. There are things down there that aren't—" "Sarah, no." Elena lunged forward, but her friend had already crossed the threshold into the supernatural battlefield her office had become. The child inside her pulsed with sudden, desperate heat, and Elena felt power she didn't understand surge through her veins as everything she'd fought to keep separate crashed together at once. The power that erupted through Elena's veins felt like liquid lightning, transforming every cell in her body into something more than human. Her vision sharpened until she could see the individual dust motes suspended in the emergency lighting, could track the microscopic movements of Cassius and Lydia's supernatural battle with perfect clarity. But more terrifying than the enhanced senses was the way her mind suddenly understood things it had never learned. The silver blade in Lydia's hand was etched with binding runes. Cassius's movements followed patterns older than written history, and Sarah's terror was broadcasting her location to every supernatural predator in the building like a beacon. "Sarah, get behind me!" Elena commanded, her voice carrying an authority that made both vampires pause mid-strike. The child pulsed again, and Elena felt something vast and hungry stir in the darkness beyond her consciousness, not malevolent, but ancient and utterly alien to human experience. Lydia disengaged from Cassius with fluid grace, her silver eyes fixed on Elena with renewed fascination. Remarkable. The protective instinct is triggering accelerated development. At this rate, you'll complete the transformation within hours instead of months. What transformation? Elena kept herself positioned between Sarah and the supernatural combatants, acutely aware of how fragile her friend's mortality seemed in comparison to the forces surrounding them. "What are you turning me into?" "Not turning," Lydia corrected, circling them like a predator evaluating prey. "Awakening. Your bloodline carries dormant vampire genetics, not enough to grant immortality, but sufficient to create something entirely new and properly activated." She gestured toward Elena's abdomen. "The child is the catalyst. Its impossible existence is rewriting your DNA, making you into the first of a new species," Sarah whimpered, pressing closer to Elena's back. "Elena, what is she talking about? What's happening to you?" Elena could feel her friend's terror like a physical weight, but beneath it was something else. A growing awareness that Sarah's presence here wasn't coincidence. Her enhanced senses caught subtle markers she'd missed before. The way Sarah's heartbeat carried an unusual rhythm, the faint metallic scent clinging to her clothes, the nearly imperceptible tension in her posture that suggested training Elena had never known about. "Sarah," Elena said quietly, her new awareness painting terrible possibilities. "How did you get past building security? The elevators should be locked down." Her friend's silence stretched too long, and when Sarah finally spoke, her voice had lost its terrified edge. "I'm sorry, Elena. I never wanted it to happen this way." The betrayal hit Elena like a physical blow, made worse by the way the child inside her recoiled from Sarah's presence. "You're with them." "Not with them," Sarah said, stepping backward toward the shattered doorway. "I'm something else entirely. Someone who's been watching over you since Prague, making sure you stayed safe until we understood what the baby represented." Cassius snarled, his civilized mask completely abandoned. "Council of Shadows. I should have sensed you." "You would have. if Elena hadn't been unconsciously shielding me. Sarah's form began to shimmer, her human appearance dissolving like smoke to reveal something that hurt to look at directly, tall, androgynous, with skin that seemed to contain starlight and eyes like black holes. The child recognizes family, even when it doesn't understand what that means yet. Elena staggered backward, her enhanced senses screaming warnings. Family? The baby isn't just vampire and human. The creature that had been Sarah explained, its voice now harmonizing with itself in ways that made Elena's bones ache. There's a third component, something much older that was sleeping in your bloodline until Cassius's essence awakened it. Lydia hissed, raising her silver blade. Shadow spawn. This changes everything. But the being ignored her, its attention focused entirely on Elena. The child will be able to walk between all three worlds, mortal, vampire, and shadow. It will have power over life, death, and the spaces between. That's why everyone wants it, and why you're becoming something new. Your body is preparing to house and protect a being that could reshape the supernatural order. Elena pressed both hands against her abdomen as the child pulsed with sudden violence, its warmth spiking until she gasped with pain. Around them, the building's emergency lighting began to flicker in rhythm with the baby's heartbeat, and shadows started moving independently of their sources. The awakening is accelerating beyond safe parameters, Lydia observed, lowering her weapon as she studied Elena with clinical fascination. If this continues, she'll burn out before reaching term. Cassius moved to Elena's side, his cold presence somehow stabilizing the chaotic energy radiating from her skin. Then we stop talking and start moving. Every faction in the city will have felt that power surge. As if summoned by his words, inhuman roars echoed from the stairwells, growing closer with each passing second. Elena realized with crystal clarity that her ordinary life was truly over, not just changed, but burned away completely. Whatever came next, she would face it as something unprecedented, carrying a child that might be salvation or apocalypse. The question was whether she would choose her own path, or have it chosen for her. The inhuman roars from the stairwells crescendoed into something that made Elena's enhanced hearing feel like it was bleeding. The child inside her responded with another violent pulse, and this time the pain drove her to her knees as power she couldn't control erupted through every nerve ending. The emergency lights didn't just flicker, they exploded in showers of sparks that should have plunged them into darkness, but Elena could see everything with perfect clarity, as if her eyes had become sources of light themselves. "Elena!" Cassius reached for her, but his touch sent shockwaves through her transformed nervous system. She screamed, and the sound shattered every remaining window in the office, sending glass cascading like deadly rain. Through the chaos, she heard Lydia's clinical voice. Complete systemic failure. The awakening is consuming her faster than her body can adapt. She has minutes, perhaps less. The shadow being that had worn Sarah's face moved closer, its starlight skin pulsing in rhythm with Elena's heartbeat. The child is trying to protect itself by accelerating the transformation. It doesn't understand that it's killing the host. "Then make it understand," Cassius snarled, his amber eyes blazing with desperate fury. "Or we lose them both." Elena tried to speak, to tell them she could hear the baby's consciousness touching hers, alien and vast and terrified in ways that transcended human emotion. But her throat felt like it was full of molten metal, and when she opened her mouth, only light poured out. The roars from the stairwell suddenly cut off, replaced by something infinitely worse. Silence that felt hungry and deliberate. Elena's expanded awareness showed her what was coming, creatures that registered as voids in her supernatural perception, moving with coordinated precision through the building's corridors. Behind them, she sensed the purifier's zealous hatred like acid in her mind, and trailing everything, the cold clinical interest of more Covenant operatives. "Null walkers," the shadow being whispered, its harmonic voice fracturing with what might have been fear. The purifiers brought null walkers. Elena didn't know what that meant, but the terror radiating from both Cassius and Lydia told her everything she needed to understand. These were the things that hunted supernatural beings, and they were here for her child. The realization triggered something primal in Elena's transforming consciousness. Every protective instinct she'd ever possessed as a doctor, as a woman, as a mother-to-be, crystallized into a singular focus that cut through the chaos of her awakening abilities like a blade through silk. The uncontrolled power coursing through her veins suddenly found direction and purpose. Not my child. Not while I'm breathing. The thought wasn't entirely her own. She could feel the baby responding to her determination, its panic shifting into something that felt disturbingly like anticipation. The pain that had been tearing her apart moments before transformed into strength that defied every law of physics and biology she'd ever learned. Elena rose to her feet, her body moving with fluid grace that belonged to something far more dangerous than Dr. Elena Vasquez had ever been. When she spoke, her voice harmonized with itself like the shadow beings, but where its tones suggested starlight and void, hers carried the resonance of blood and bone and the space between life and death. "Everyone out," she commanded, and the authority in her voice made even the ancient vampires step backward. "Now!" "Elena, you don't understand what you're becoming," Cassius said, his expression torn between awe and horror. "This level of transformation, it's not reversible. You're burning away your humanity." She looked at him with eyes that now blazed like twin suns, and for the first time since Prague, she saw him flinch. "My humanity was never what mattered. The child matters. Protecting what's growing inside me matters. Everything else is negotiable." The first Nullwalker appeared in the shattered doorway, a humanoid void that seemed to absorb light and hope with equal hunger. Elena's enhanced senses couldn't read it at all, as if it existed in a space between dimensions where her new abilities couldn't reach. Behind it, she counted 7 more of the creatures moving with mechanical precision through the corridor. Beyond them, the Purifier's fanatical determination pressed against her consciousness like a migraine made of righteous fury. And threading through it all, the Covenant's scientific curiosity felt like ice water in her veins. All of them wanted her child. All of them saw her as either incubator or obstacle. Elena smiled, and the expression held nothing of the woman who'd spent 6 months hiding in Seattle's rain-soaked anonymity. This smile belonged to something that had never existed before, a being caught between 3 worlds, carrying a child that could rewrite the rules of existence itself. "You want to study what I'm becoming?" she asked, addressing all the hunters converging on her position through her expanded awareness. "You want to harvest my baby's blood for your experiments and crusades?" The child pulsed once more, and Elena felt its consciousness fully merge with hers for the first time. In that moment of perfect unity, she understood exactly what her offspring would become, and what she was willing to do to protect it. Come and take them. The Nullwalkers moved like liquid shadow given predatory purpose, flowing into Elena's office with movements that defied natural law. Elena raised her hands, power blazing through her transformed veins, and struck the first creature with raw force that should have obliterated anything made of flesh and bone. Instead, her energy simply disappeared. The Nullwalker absorbed her attack like a sponge drinking water, its void-like form growing marginally darker as it continued its advance. Elena staggered, feeling a portion of her newly awakened strength drain away into nothingness. "They consume supernatural energy," Lydia called out, backing toward the shattered windows. "Everything you throw at them makes them stronger." The child inside Elena pulsed with sudden panic, its consciousness recoiling from the approaching voids. For the first time since her transformation began, Elena felt genuine terror, not for herself, but for the impossibility growing in her womb. These creatures weren't just hunters. They were designed specifically to unmake beings like what she was becoming. Cassius launched himself at the lead Nullwalker, with centuries of combat experience driving his movements. His claws, capable of shredding steel, passed through the creature harmlessly, while its counterattack sent him crashing through the office's interior wall. He didn't get back up. "No!" Elena's scream shattered the remaining structural glass throughout the floor, but when she tried to channel her power toward the creature's menacing, Cassius's motionless form, The energy simply vanished into their hungry darkness. The shadow being that had been Sarah moved with inhuman speed, interposing itself between Elena and the advancing Nullwalkers. "The building's emergency protocols," it said urgently. "Elena, the fire suppression system, it's not water." Elena's enhanced awareness suddenly understood. The clinic's cutting-edge fire suppression used a chemical compound designed to neutralize biological hazards. If she could trigger it while the Nullwalkers were feeding on supernatural energy. She reached for the emergency controls with her mind, her transformed consciousness interfacing directly with the building's electronic systems. But the effort of maintaining her awakened state while the creatures drained her power was like trying to hold onto handfuls of sand. She could feel pieces of herself dissolving with every passing second. The sprinkler system activated with a mechanical shriek, flooding the space with chemical suppressant that should have disrupted the Nullwalkers' energy absorption. Instead, they seemed to adapt in real time, their forms shifting to accommodate the new threat, without losing their relentless advance. Elena felt the baby's heartbeat stutter inside her, its impossible existence faltering as her transformed body began to fail. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was losing the child. All her newfound power meant nothing against creatures specifically designed to hunt the supernatural. "Elena, the roof!" Lydia appeared beside her, silver blade now blazing with runic energy. "There's a helicopter. We can still—" Her words cut off as a Nullwalker's void touch caught her shoulder. Lydia's scream was the sound of something ancient and powerful being unmade, her centuries of existence draining away in seconds. She crumbled to dust before she could finish the sentence. Elena ran, cradling her abdomen as she felt the child's consciousness fragmenting under the assault of the creature's energy drain. Behind her, the shadow being fought a desperate rearguard action, its starlight form flickering like a dying flame as it bought her precious seconds. The emergency stairwell stretched above her like a concrete throat, each step sending jolts of agony through her failing transformation. She could feel her enhanced abilities burning out one by one, her supernatural vision dimming, her expanded awareness contracting, the newfound strength in her limbs guttering like candle flames in a hurricane. On the 10th floor, her legs gave out. Elena collapsed against the stair railing, gasping as the child inside her pulsed with increasingly erratic rhythm. Through the stairwell's small window, she could see the helicopter Lydia had mentioned, its rotors already spinning as purifier operatives prepared for extraction. They weren't here to capture her anymore. They were here to clean up the mess, to eliminate the abomination before it could fully manifest. Footsteps echoed from below, human this time, but no less terrifying. The purifiers had sent conventional forces to finish what the Nullwalkers had started. Elena pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby's heartbeat growing fainter with each passing moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the fading consciousness inside her. "I couldn't protect you. I wasn't strong enough." The child pulsed one final time, its response flooding Elena's mind with images she couldn't quite process. Flashes of futures that might have been, of a world where the boundaries between life and death, mortal and immortal, light and shadow, had been rewritten entirely. Then the connection severed, and Elena felt something precious and irreplaceable die inside her as the impossible pregnancy failed. She was still Elena Vasquez, brilliant hematologist, but she was no longer the mother of revolution, no longer the bridge between worlds. She was just a woman, broken and alone, waiting for her enemies to find her in a concrete stairwell while rain began to fall against the windows like tears.